Hey friends, welcome to Huge Studio. My name is Robbie and I like to sculpt and paint. And it's the week after Halloween, which is that weird in-between time where half of us are still clinging to spooky season and the other half have already moved on to deck in the halls, but I like monsters year-round, so instead of moving on like the rest of the well-adjusted adults, I decided to sculpt one more creepy thing. This time it's a rotting jack-o'-lantern, inspired by those pumpkins that have been sitting on the porch a little too long, and I thought, what if one of those pumpkins could finally bite back? So that's exactly what I'm doing with this ball of clay here, making a jack-o'-lantern monster because again, why not? Once the clay is all nice and relatively smoothed out, I grab a stick and start sketching in all the pumpkin muscles. I think they're technically called ribs, but pumpkin muscle sounds pretty dope, so I'm running with it. I want this to look like a traditional jack-o'-lantern that's come to life, so I'm going to carve out the face just like you would a regular pumpkin. Nothing weird yet, but that comes later. It always does. Once I get a sketch in place, I use an X-Acto blade to cut along the sketch lines down to the aluminum base and then fish out all the clay out of the eyes, nose, and mouth holes. And then I realized I did it all wrong. What I should have done was add the ribs first, then carve the face, then bake. Instead, I had to add the ribs afterwards, then recut the face holes as I went, so yeah, nailed it. We'll cover that shortly. Anyway, once it's hardened, I pop off the top and try to pull out the foil. Easy, right? No, it's stuck to the clay. I spend way longer than intended pulling out one tiny, unsatisfying piece at a time. This would be where you insert every artist's favorite term, or excuse, which is trust the process. Pretend all is going well until the project is just unsavable, or hope for a happy accident and claim you knew what you're doing all along, which is what we're going for here. Once we get the mess with the foil sorted, I finally add the forgotten ribs. I build them up in panels, sort of like on a volleyball. I attach them one by one, then roll the edges until it looks convincingly like... well, it looks like a pumpkin, who'da thunk it? After smoothing everything out and then baking it again, I come to a fun little realization that the mouth is just way too small for all the teeth that I want to cram in there. So I take this nifty little X-Acto saw blade I found on Temu and get to work recutting the mouth. Everything is going great until the saw blade remembers it came from Temu and decides to get all wonky for no reason at all. After about 5 seconds of trying to straighten it, I decide all is lost and move on. I like the idea of giving the pumpkin a little twisted, Tim Burton style grin, so I grab a carving tool and dig a little swirl coming off each corner of the mouth. Next, I wrap some sandpaper around a popsicle stick and go to town on all the jagged edges of the mouth, trying to smooth out all the saw blade texture, which works like a champ and looks great as long as you don't look too closely, because this little guy has a face like mine that benefits from distance. After that, I roll up some fat little clay worms to act as our gums and cram them through a hole I carved in the bottom. I brushed on some bacon bond and squished them into place as best I could. They're not great, but they are fine, which I guess is good enough if you lower your standards. For the teeth, I started with some semi-translucent Sculpey, rolled it into a wormish shape, and cut off little chiclet-sized nuggets. Then I pinched and squished them until they looked like teeth. Crooked little teeth, kind of like pumpkin seeds if pumpkin seeds made a hillbilly smile. I used the same semi-translucent clay to roll some little balls for the eyes, and with a ball stylus I made a tiny little indent for the iris. Then I tossed the eyes and the teeth in the oven to bake, which is a totally normal statement. Once baked, I used a pair of pliers to shove the cured clay teeth into the soft clay gums because some of them apparently did not approve of the tweezers that I would have rather used. Every time I tried to push the uncooperative teeth in, they slipped and shot across my studio, which led to several fun-filled rounds of where the f*** did the teeth go. But in the end, we eventually got them all in. Ain't he cute? Anyway, I used a ball stylus again to shape the gums a bit to give them a slightly gummy, slightly carved texture, and then I shoved the eyes into their sockets. With the eyes in, it was looking okay, but kind of bland, so I squished some fresh clay on and added some bags under the eyes and dug in a few wrinkles, hoping to give it a slightly unhinged vibe. Now that everything has its place, I pop and pull the eyes and teeth back out, which will make painting easier for future me. The last thing we have to sculpt is the stem, so I plop a long strip of clay on top and mess around with it until I get a sense of how I want it to curl. Then I straighten it back out and carve in a few grooves and details to give it that stem look. After that, I give it a few twists and then push it back into the curl that I like. Once in place, I scratch and carve a few more grooves to suggest a woody, viney texture, and then it's ready for a final bake. And after that, we're ready to paint. We're starting with an orange base because pumpkins are orange. And while our pumpkin may have been a healthy orange once upon a time, now we want it to look dirty and rotting. So I brush on a few thin washes of burnt umber and then dab and wipe with a dry towel. Just enough to darken the recessed areas while leaving a hint of stain on the surface. So it's still orange, but now like a sad orange. Then we paint the stem brown because, yeah, stems are brown. Creativity is running high around here. While the base coat on the stem dries, we dab some paint with a sponge onto the bottom of the pumpkin to suggest dirt. Once the base coat on the stem dries, I go back in with some lighter browns just to break up the color a little bit and to suggest dirt and grime to help sell the past its prime look. Then we use a sponge again to add a bit more dirt and grime and rot coming off the stem because why not? I then use a ball stylus to paint a perfectly round coat of orange into the eye's iris. Then I use a small brush to add small lines and details into the iris to give it some color variation, but I did not change the colors enough to make this noticeable, so the details are relatively invisible. Perfect. I glob on some UV resin to suggest a cornea, and then I brush on a little red pan pastels to the back of the eye to crank up the unhinged look. Now that everything's painted and ready, I pop the eyes back into their sockets, which gives us our first decent look at our crazy little pumpkin. Then I start shoving the teeth back into their holes one by one. With a little glue and a little pressure, they fit snug, which is nice because for once something actually fits the way it's supposed to. After that, I brush on some more UV resin to give the eyes a wet look and then cure it with my magical purple flashlight. They look creepy and crazy and completely unhinged, which honestly feels like a win. I do the same for the teeth to make sure they look extra wet and sloppy like every cliche monster mouth, because for some reason being terrifying also means excessive drooling. It also means a dirty mouth, and I realize that these were way too clean for whatever this thing's supposed to be, so I smear on some grime and tone down the dental hygiene a bit. And there we go, a finished jack-o'-lantern complete with questionable dental work and overexcited, unsettling eyes. If you enjoyed watching me fumble my way through this project, make sure to subscribe so you can see what other mistakes I try to pass off as art next time. So that's it for this one. Thanks for hanging around and watching me make my weird little jack-o'-lantern, because life's just more fun when you're weird, so keep it weird. And stay creative.